Let's do some crafting. Hey guys, it is Jen with Mother Time. I am so excited for today's video. I know a lot of you are going to be excited too. I get asked all the time about my craft videos and when am I going to do another craft video? Well, if you've been waiting, the wait is over. Today's the day. I have a brand new craft video to share with you and I am so excited for you to see it. I love the way these crafts turned out. I've already made them and they are amazing. I took some thrift store finds, of course, and I gave them a makeover to give them a very primitive, rustic look. Cannot wait for you to see. If you love primitive decor, you're going to love this. And if primitive decor is not your thing, you're still going to enjoy this because you'll get some ideas, techniques, and inspo to apply to your own crafting style. So stay tuned and watch it. You're going to love it. And wait till you see the last one. That one, it was one of those things that I was unsure exactly what I wanted to do, and it all came together, and I love the way it turned out. So, and these items that I'm using for this video too are things that you can easily find mostly at your craft store, or even things that you may even have on hand. So nothing unique or, you know, that you're gonna have a hard time finding. So if you like these ideas, you can easily do them too. So I am so excited for this video and for you guys to see. I love it. You're gonna love it too. So anyways, grab yourself a hot cup of coffee or hot tea, sit back, relax, and let's get to crafting. Here are the items that I got at the thrift store that I'm going to be using for these crafts. I'm going to spray paint these items first. I have 2 of these tin cylinder containers, this star candle holder, and then this rectangle tin container. They were each $1.99. Then I had a 20% off savers coupon. Honestly, I probably normally would not spend even that much for what I paid for them. I usually at other thrift stores get these for under $1, but I got these at Savers, so I'm going to use these. I'm going to spray paint all of these with Rust-Oleum in the color Espresso. Started spray painting these outside, but it was so windy, so I dragged everything into the garage and adding a coat of spray paint, and then once it's dry, I'll start crafting. Here are my cylinder containers that I spray painted. They're nice and dry. So first up, I have some matte Mod Podge, and I'm going to apply it on my cylinder containers. I'm going to go in the direction that I want a crackle effect. So I'm going to go with vertical strokes up and down. I'm not just applying it in every which way direction, because once the Mod Podge dries slightly, I still want it a little tacky. I'm going to apply a coat of chalk paint, and then once I dry it, it's going to have this really cool distressed crackle effect. While the containers are drying slightly, I'm going to work on the lid. So I'm going to make these look very rusty, and I love this technique. I've shared it quite a bit, but I'm going to show you again in case you've never seen it. So I'm adding a coat of Mod Podge on top of the lid. Then I'm going to sprinkle it generously with cinnamon, dust and tap a little of the excess cinnamon off, and then I dab the Mod Podge on top to seal in that Mod Podge. But I do it really messy because I think the messier, the better, and the more realistic and grungier it looks. And so now I'm adding that cinnamon on top, and then I'm gonna dab. I don't wanna brush the cinnamon off. So I'm taking my brush and I'm dabbing literally chunks of Mod Podge on top because it's going to give it just a really cool effect once it's dry. I even get into the cinnamon the excess cinnamon that has come off, and I dab my Mod Podge, and then it gets quite messy, but the end result is so cool. So here I am now tapping the Mod Podge on top of the lid that has the cinnamon, and that's sealing that cinnamon in. But also too, you can see I'm taking and scooping a little bit of that cinnamon that is the excess cinnamon on the plate, and I'm adding that and applying that as well because it gives it a really cool look once it's done. So once I've applied all of the Mod Podge on top of the lid, I'm going to set that aside to dry. And while the lids are drying, now I'm going to add a coat of chalk paint on top of the containers. But some of the Mod Podge did dry. I was working too long, I guess, on the lid. So I added a little bit more Mod Podge on the cylinder, gave it a quick little dry so it was still tacky. And now I'm going to apply my chalk paint in that same direction. So I'm doing vertical strokes on top of my cylinder containers, and then I'm going to take my dryer and I'm going to dry the paint, and you're going to see this really cool distressed crackle look. I love watching it, so I'm going to really show you here how it turns out once I start drying the container. Now I'm going to dry it, and you're going to see here very quickly that crackled look up here. There it goes. It's so cool. At first you're like, is this really going to work? As long as your Mod Podge underneath was still a little wet and tacky when you apply your paint on top, this technique is going to work. I used to use this other kind of Crackle applicator for projects like this, and this has now become my favorite way of getting this crackle look using the Mod Podge. It's so cool, and it's just so fun to watch. So you can see here, just by adding my dryer to the wet paint, it's giving me that look in a matter of minutes. It's so cool. I love doing this. So you just want to make sure, if you do this yourself, whatever direction you go with the Mod Podge, you're going to go in that same direction with your paint on top. And this is how it turned out. Look at how cool with that crackled look. It's such a fun technique. So now I'm going to do the same thing to the smaller container. I'm just applying a little bit of Mod Podge where it dried, adding my dryer to just dry that Mod Podge a little bit. And then I'm going to apply some paint on top of that tacky Mod Podge, going in the same direction. And then I'll apply my dryer on top of the paint to get that crackled look. And let's watch the magic happen again. I'm applying the heat to the paint, and here it goes with that crackled look. It's so fun to watch. So I love doing this. So I'm going to dry this off, and here are how the containers look. So I just love doing this, but I wanted to make them even more primitive and grungy looking. I have these labels. I got them on Etsy. I'll link them below. I printed them on cardstock. I'm going to cut out a couple of them. And then what I like to do to give it a torn look is I'm going to add, you could add some water if you wanted to, around the edges. I'm just using a little bit of my coffee grunge around the edge, but again, water will work. You could just tear it too, but it kind of just makes it, especially when using the cardstock, it's a thicker paper. So doing this, and then it'll be easy to tear to give it a very torn look. Speaking of coffee grunge, I'll show you how I make it. I love using this for my crafting projects. So I'm just taking some hot water, about a cup, adding about a half a cup of instant coffee, nothing fancy. I think mine is from the dollar store. And then a couple tablespoons of some ground cinnamon. Whisk it up, give it a good shake so it all dissolves. And I love using this on a lot of my projects. You could even use it for when you are staining your muslin too, but I actually just take a little bit of coffee. I like this particular grunge for when I'm doing my projects like this. So I'm using some scissors just so I can get a little bit of a grip on the paper, and then I'm gently tearing it so I have that torn edge. Then I take a little bit of my coffee grunge and go around the edges as well. So here are my labels, and now I'm going to attach them to the containers. I'm adding a little bit of Mod Podge to the back and going to add it to the containers. what I'm checking for here is making sure that seam is in the back. I don't want to apply the label and then have the seam right on the side. I'm always kind of making sure those are not as visible. So adding the Mod Podge to the back of this label and going to put it on the front of the container. Now I'm going over the top of the labels with a little bit more of the Mod Podge, and then I want to grunge this up even more. It's really pretty like this, but I want to give it even more of a primitive look. So I'm taking some of that coffee grunge and lightly kind of going on top of it, and it's kind of giving it a really nice primitive colored look. Then I love doing this too. I'm going to take a little bit of that instant coffee and sprinkle it on top, and it kind of just melts into the liquid and gives this really cool effect. I'm going to get my hands into it as well and kind of just spread it around, just having fun and playing with it. Also adding a little bit of Mod Podge on top. But once you add that, sprinkle that coffee on top, you really don't want to let it touch it. You want to make sure it kind of like melts into it a little bit and gives it a really cool technique. So I'm just playing around with the instant coffee, adding a little bit of the Mod Podge, adding a little bit of the coffee grunge, just going around, and wait to see how this turns out at the end. It gives it a really old, primitive look. It's so fun to do. So again, I'm sprinkling on and tapping on the instant coffee and then dabbing Mod Podge on top of that and then letting it sit. And again, it just kind of melts right in and gives it a really cool effect. You can kind of see it on the back there, checking to see how it looks with the lid. And then I continue doing this, adding a little bit of the grunge on top of it, and then taking some of the instant coffee, sprinkling it, and then dabbing it with the Mod Podge on top. Just really gives it an old, grungy, primitive look. Look at how cool that is. Isn't it cool? I just love doing this. So I'm going to do the same thing to the smaller one. First, I'm going to show you how it looks without doing it on top. If you just want to do like the distressed look, you could even just add some of the coffee grunge on top of it and not even sprinkle the coffee, instant coffee on it too. So many fun ways to really kind of have fun making this. But I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm taking a little bit of the coffee grunge and adding it on top, kind of tinting that a little bit because I still want to see that distressing as well. Then I'm sprinkling the instant coffee on top, dabbing some of the Mod Podge on top of that instant coffee. I'm taking some of the instant coffee even that I had fallen on the table. Then here it is. I'm going to give it a quick dry too, and that really sets that instant coffee sprinkled on. And look at how cool these turned out. They're so fun. It's hard to believe what these were originally had like the little ducks on them too. And now I'm going to add the lids on top. And I don't plan on actually using these. These are for decorative, but it's so fun to add these on top and to use these in displays. And I'm also going to I took some little knobs that I had from Hobby Lobby. I spray painted those as well. And I'm going to hot glue them on top. This is what it looks like. I love the little knob on top. I love layering on all of this to really give it a primitive look too. These are so cool, but of course I have to add a little bit of homespun around them. So I'm going to tear a little bit of homespun. I get my homespun at Hobby Lobby, just tearing some pieces, and I'm going to tie it around the top of each container. I really love watching these come to life too, and the transformation, to think again that these were just these cute little duck containers, and by just adding up some paint and then of course the Mod Podge and the cinnamon and the coffee grunge, just a few supplies, really customized these containers. Look at how cute these are. I love them. I love them so much. Just a really pretty container to use on a coffee bar or anywhere throughout your home. I love the little homespun on top of them as well. It gives it that little final touch. So next up, I'm going to use this container that I spray painted as well, but I'm going to actually add some black paint, chalk paint on top of it too. At first I was going to just do the rustic technique on top of the entire thing, then I had another idea. So I have some chalk paint on top of these. I'm just going to give it a quick coat, and while the paint is still wet, I'm going to sprinkle it with some cinnamon. So I still want the paint to be wet when I sprinkle the cinnamon on top. Then I'm going to dust it off. That cinnamon is going to, stick into the paint. You could apply some Mod Podge on top of it too, but once I'm all done with it, wait until you see. It'll be fine. So I love the way this turned out. It's so cool. I can't wait for you to see the end of it. So sprinkling some cinnamon on top of the wet paint. Then I'm going to take a dry brush, lightly dry brush any of that excess off, but it also helps stick that on the paint as well. And then I start playing around and really adding a lot to this to make it look like an old container. Again, I can't wait for you to see how this turns out. So just taking a dry brush and really kind of pressing that cinnamon in, but also getting that excess cinnamon off, falling onto the plate too. I'm going to take the lid and I'm going to do the same rusty technique. So I just decided to do that to the lid. I'm going to add my Mod Podge and then dab some cinnamon on top. So the lid's gonna look nice and rusty. Getting my hands into this and really kind of pressing it too. Now I'm going to take my dryer, because that paint was still wet, and give it a good final dry. Get off any of that excess cinnamon, but the rest of it's sticking on really, really good. And then I'm going to work on the lid. For the lid, I'm doing the same as I did the other lids, adding a coat of Mod Podge, sprinkling it with cinnamon while that Mod Podge is wet, tapping off the excess cinnamon, and then I'm going to dab Mod Podge on top, and I like it really messy, so I'll even scoop some of the cinnamon that fell into the Mod Podge and really give it a nice distressed look. I'm dabbing that Mod Podge on top of it, then I'll set that aside to dry and continue working on the container. This is what the container looks like so far. Still not done with it. I'm going to pop the lid on top of it too. I love that rusty lid with the container. I like that contrast. I think it's really pretty. And just like this would be really cute too, but I've got more to do to it. I have these labels that I found on Etsy. I'll link them below. I couldn't choose between the chocolate chip cookie one or the molasses one, but I also like the other ones too for the holidays, so I'll save those for then. I decided to go with the molasses ones. So again, do the same thing. I'm just taking some of that coffee grunge. You could use water too, or just even cut it out, but I want to give it a torn look. So I'm applying that around to kind of just help when I tear it, give it a really torn look. So once that liquid kind of just melts into the cardstock, it's really easy to tear. You can see how easily I'm tearing it off, but just still being careful so I don't actually tear it. And then I'm going to add some Mod Podge on the back of it and apply it to my container. I also wanted to give it a little bit of a crinkly look too, so I'm gently crinkling it up a little bit. I didn't want to crinkle it too much and then tear it. So I'm finding a good spot, again, seeing where that seam is. I always want to make sure that I'm not placing it right where the seam is. And so I'm going to add that Mod Podge to the back of the label and stick it on the container. I'm gonna go around and add a little bit of Mod Podge on different parts of the container, then sprinkle it or get my hands into it and add some cinnamon on top of that Mod Podge, and then dab some Mod Podge on top of that cinnamon. And so I'm going around here, I'm adding a bigger spot right here, adding the Mod Podge, sprinkling the cinnamon, dabbing some Mod Podge on top of that. So I'm just gonna go around and play to give it a really old, distressed look. I really like using my hands and spreading that cinnamon onto and pressing it in like I am here. It gives it a rusty look. Sometimes when I just sprinkle cinnamon on top and then dab it on without using my hands, it'll give it like a thicker look. But by using my hands and rubbing it in, gives it a really neat rusty look. This is how it's turning out, but I'm not done yet. I love the way this is turning out. So finally realized it was getting dark, turned on the lights. So here we go. We can see it a lot better now. So I'm just going to continue to go around, adding a little bit of Mod Podge in spots, having fun, dabbing some of that cinnamon on or using my hands, and then dabbing the Mod Podge on top to seal that cinnamon in. And then once it dries, it just gives it a really cool look. And look how this turned out. I love it. It looks like an old rusty tin. I bet if you gave this to somebody, they wouldn't even know. They would think that it was an old tin that you found somewhere. Not a Santa tin, right? And I love how it coordinates with the other tins that I did too. I decided to keep the molasses tin just like this, simple, because I love how it coordinates with these two. And here's one more up close look at it. Can you believe how cool this turned out? I love it. And I'll show you everything at the end, all pulled together, all styled together. I love how all of this turned out. So next up, I have this pickle jar that I picked up at Aunt Vet's for only 80 cents. Of course, you can use a pickle jar you may have, or, find one at the thrift store or whatever you have. I love this technique. So this is another technique that I've shared before, but I just want to show you how cool it turns out. I did it when I shared it before a little differently too, but I'm going to add a coat of Mod Podge to my pickle jar. You could use a mason jar. And then I'm going to wrap it with parchment paper, decoupage it essentially. And it's going to give it a really cool look. So once I have my Mod Podge on there while it's still wet, I am wrapping my jar with some parchment paper. I don't really care about the creases. That just adds to the wornness and texture of this. Plus I'm going to be adding lots on it too. So I don't mind for a little bit of wrinkles on it too. So I'm going to wrap it nice and tight, get out as many little air bubbles as I can. Then I'm going to seal it shut with a little bit more Mod Podge and then trim off that excess parchment paper. And this is how it looks once it's trimmed down. And now the fun begins. I'm going to add some Mod Podge on top, sprinkle it with some coffee. I'm going to even get into adding some cinnamon as well, then dabbing some Mod Podge on top. And I'm just doing it in certain sections so you still see the parchment coming through, but then with the added layer of the coffee and then the cinnamon. And then once I add the coffee on there too, I'm not going to really like rub it around. I kind of want to tap and dab the Mod Podge on top, and it kind of just soaks right in and just really creates a cool effect, kind of like on the other containers I did. I love doing this, and this is going to be a pickle jar. The little label that I use, it says pickles on it too. So I'm really making this into just a old grungy looking pickle jar, and I can't wait to show you how it turns out. Now I'm layering in the cinnamon, so I'm gently sprinkling that over the jar and then dabbing with the brush my Mod Podge on top, and that's sealing everything in, but also really creating this really cool look on top of the jar. I'm cutting out my bread and butter pickle label. Gonna get that attached to it before I add too much, because I also want to incorporate the label into everything and get that all grunged up with the rest of the jar. So I cut that out the same way that I've cut out the others, using some of my liquid around it to give it that torn look. Then I'm going to add some Mod Podge on the back of the label and attach it to the jar. In one of these jars that I've made before that I've shared, I actually added some fairy lights inside of the jar, and I love that subtle glow that you get inside the jar with the parchment paper. It's so pretty. So I'll link that video below if you want to see that. I'm not going to be adding lights to this one, but I just wanted to mention it. So if you're interested in making this, I wanted to just give you that idea too with adding the lights. You could also use some muslin, or you could even use some cheesecloth on top of the jar. I'm going to be using some homespun, and I actually thought about even dyeing my homespun and grunging that homespun up, but to coordinate with the rest of the homespun that I've used for the other projects, I'm not. But if I wanted to, I would just take my homespun and dip it in a little bit of coffee, or even in my coffee grunge, and that would grunge it up too. But I'm not going to do that, but I wanted to also give you that idea in case you're interested in making this too. So here's my piece of homespun. I'm going to add it to the top of the jar and then attach it to the jar with some twine. I love making these jars. They are so fun to make, and they're perfect for a hutch or a shelf or a jelly cupboard or your coffee bar. You can make a whole bunch of these affordably too, and you could use any of these techniques. You could do the parchment paper, you could grunge it all up with just the cinnamon and Mod Podge. I've done that before too, but look at how cool this turned out. Don't you love it? I think this turned out so good. And finally, the last project for today's video. So I spray painted this brown, and then after I spray painted it, I'm like, I should have spray painted this one black, because I wanted to give it kind of like that punch tin look. But even after that, I didn't really know what I was going to do after I spray painted it black. And then literally when it was sitting here next to this hot fudge jar, I think it is, right? I was like, oh, the light bulb went off. I was like, what if I put this on top of this? And I set it there, and this all happened real time as I was filming it. And it was like, okay, this is gonna look really good. So I took it outside, didn't even take my camera with me, and spray painted it. And then once the spray paint dried, brought it back in, added some hot glue, and voila, look at this. How cool is this for a little light? it is the cutest little primitive light. So of course, gotta add some homespun. So I'm gonna just wrap some homespun around the base of it and it's done. Easy peasy and turned out so cute. And here is everything I made all together. I love how it all coordinates. It is so pretty, it is cozy, it is homey. And to think what these pieces were originally, we have a pickle jar, we have a Santa tin, we have a couple duck tins, and it just, I love that these have transformed into these really pretty home decor pieces that were affordable to make and repurposing items as well. So these items I got at the thrift store, but you probably have stuff laying around that you might be able to use as well. I probably do myself too, but I picked these up at the thrift store and I love them tucked in little vignettes like this. It's so pretty and these are so fun to make too. Okay guys, that is all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you got some crafting inspo too. Give this video a big thumbs up if you did. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite craft was. Mine is probably either the last little lamp. That is just so cool and I just love the way that it turned out considering I was unsure of what I wanted to do. But my favorite is this tin. It is just, it's so cool. I grabbed it again just to show you one more time. I mean, doesn't this look like an old vintage tin? It is so neat to think there was like a little Santa picture underneath there, right? And now it looks old and rustic. So, it's so cool. I love this one so much. I love all of them though, but this one would have to be my favorite. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you're also following me on Facebook and Instagram at Mother Time for daily decor and DIY inspo. You can also check out my blog, mothertime.com. And if you enjoyed this video as well as cooking and crafting and home decor and all the things, make sure you hit that little subscribe button so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.